The just war theory, a related principle and application of the principle of forfeiture, is in the so-called just war theory. The principle of forfeiture can be used not only to justify an act of individual self-defense, as in the case mentioned above, but also in the case of defending a whole country from an unjust aggressor or foreign invader. For example, if genocide is occurring in a country, war is justified as it aids the victims. In essence, the cause of war must be in self-defense or other defense to be ethical. However, the just war theory, which actually refers only to a defensive kind of war employed by a country under attack to protect itself, is only justified under certain specific conditions. Number 1. Lawful authority. For a war to be just and thus justified, it has to come from the lawful and competent authority. For example, sa naganap na war between the country of Russia and Ukraine, President Zelensky and his people have a lawful authority in declaring a defensive war against Russia. Allowed silang gumamit ng mga armas to protect themselves and their country against the aggressor. Lawful authority is defined legally through the Constitution, but this is not true to all nations. Other countries do have problems with regard to the question of proper authority that should represent the whole nation in cases of declaring a state of war. Number 2. Just cause. According to the just war tradition, war is justified only if it is waged to protect the innocents from imminent harm. Speaking here of just cause, this may include the punishment for offenses or restoration of what was unjustly seized. As such, wars that are waged to invade and subjugate a nation and its people are morally wrong and can never be justified. Just like in the case of an individual person, nations do also have the right to defend themselves from unjust aggressor. For example, the clearest example of just cause is self-defense against an aggressor. For example, when an enemy has crossed your borders and invaded your territory, but an actual invasion is not required. Number 3. Last resort. This simply means that waging a war can never be a first and primary option of a country against another. So, in last resort, diplomacy, dialogue, mediations, negotiations, arbitrations, bargaining, or compromise are some of the alternatives that can be resorted to. Only when all these and more feel that war can be considered as legitimate option. This also implies that all possible peaceful and legal means to resolve conflict must be thoroughly exhausted and tried before one can resort to war. Number 4. Good intention. Countries that decide to go to war should have the element of good faith. This means that one should only have good motive in waging the war. A question to ask her could be, is the war for the sake of peace and justice, or is it driven by revenge, power, and greed? Right intention is necessary in order to promote the common good, peace, protection of human rights, preservation of moral order, etc. Wars of aggression without any previous provocation and driven primarily, if not solely, by territorial conquest and destruction are simply immoral. Number 5. Reasonable chance of success. War can only be justified if a nation that resort to it has reasonable chance of attaining its objectives. For example, a war is only a just war if there is a reasonable chance of success. This way of putting it makes it clear that there has to be an absolute clear idea of what will count as success before any decision can be taken about the moral righteousness of a particular conflict. It is never morally right to go to war knowing fully well that success is virtually impossible, given one's military capability and that of enemy. To be morally justified, a war should have a greater likelihood of victory than defeat. In short, an unwinnable war is an immoral war. Number 6. Right use of means. For a war to be justified, the right use of means should be intrinsically moral and legal. The use of weapons of mass destruction such as nuclear bombs, chemical or biological warfare is violation of this particular condition and thus morally objectionable. It would be morally wrong to enter into a war even if there is the presence of a just cause and honest intention, if the means that will be used are not humane. This humane way of waging war is stipulated in the so-called rules for war that have been developed over the course of centuries. Number 7. Proportional response. Since war necessarily involves violence and any violent response thereof must be directly proportional to the act of provocation or aggression coming from the enemy. The act of self-defense allows only the kind of response that would repel the attack and never go to the extent of totally pulverizing the enemy to the ground. Let it be said that even if there are situations or cases that would morally justify a war, it is always the solemn moral duty of every man and woman of goodwill to avoid it from happening. The damages and destruction of war, any kind of war for that matter, to lives and properties are simply too great a price to pay for peace.